Everyone seems to love Unreal Engine 5. Gamers are constantly obsessing over the graphics showcases and begging studios to switch to the engine. Publishers love it because using it helps market their games and allows them to outsource their game development, and developers love it because it's often easier to learn than some studios' proprietary engines. With few competitors on the market that can achieve this level of graphical fidelity and technically impressive capabilities, while also still being very accessible, it makes sense why Unreal Engine is so popular. But is the obsession with Unreal Engine 5 actually ruining the gaming industry? Recently, we've seen several major studios announce their switch to Unreal Engine 5 for the future of their games. We have CD Projekt Red ditching their in-house Red engine in favor of Unreal, which based on visuals alone seems like an odd choice, as the Red engine is at times even more graphically impressive than Unreal Engine. Microsoft has rebranded 343 Industries into Halo Studios, who will now use UE5 to produce their future Halo games, and they will retire their proprietary engine that they spent years building specifically for Halo Infinite. BioWare is moving from Frostbite to Unreal, which is probably for the best, as Frostbite is not great for third-person action RPGs, but BioWare has more important game development problems to solve at this point. Who knows if they'll even live long enough to launch Mass Effect 5. Crystal Dynamics dropped their own engine, and the next Tomb Raider game will be developed on Unreal. And GCS Game World have also dropped their own engine to swap over to UE5 for Stalker 2, which is a bit concerning because their AI and NPCs used a very specific type of technology from their own engine that allowed them to create some pretty unique behavior patterns that were a staple of the series in the past. The list goes on and on. So many studios are now developing on the Unreal Engine. Now that in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing on the surface, but there are several major concerns I and many others have. This engine change comes with a lot of pros, but also potentially many cons. First, Epic Games essentially has a monopoly on the game engine market now. With each studio that switches over to Unreal, they will get a slice of the revenue on each game's sales. And they get to be the arbiters of controlling what type of games get made with the engine. Several months ago, we saw some pretty concerning censorship from Epic in regards to things your game can or cannot include, such as using words like blacklist and whitelist, slave, master, or nuke, or using gendered language like having dialogue that uses the phrase poor man's ex, or saying something like, hey guys. And I guess banning gendered language means that 50% of the world languages are suddenly unable to code in the Unreal Engine. And God only knows how far Epic will be willing to take this kind of censorship, and if developers do anything they disagree with, they could take their license away from the engine. That's concern number one. Next is the homogenization of game development. Now, Unreal Engine allows for a vast array of different games capable of wildly different art styles. You've got games like Sea of Thieves made with Unreal that have a very cartoony stylized aesthetic that still manages to be incredibly beautiful graphically. But then you've got games like Atomic Heart or Immortals of Aveum that look like generic asset flips, even if they aren't actually asset flips. I know I can't be the only one that's noticed a large number of games made with the Unreal Engine tend to have the generic Unreal Engine look about them, if you know what I mean. Games that look like tech demos, employing the same boring visual style and art style, trying to achieve photorealism in the laziest way possible because the Unreal Engine has great visuals by default, and there's often little effort to try and bring any true artistic vision to the game beyond that. And I really want to emphasize that point. The generic Unreal Engine look isn't because the program is being restrictive or putting up artistic guardrails, as evidenced by the many distinct games with entirely unique visuals that have been made on Unreal. Again, games like Sea of Thieves, Octopath Traveler, Borderlands, Little Nightmares, Unreal Engine was even used for developing Yoshi's Crafted World. Rather, most of the reason we get these generic-looking Unreal Engine games is because of lazy or passionless people who see the surface-level potential of the engine and don't actually care to make something unique with the tools they have. They just want to make everything look as photorealistic as possible and spend far too much time trying to achieve the highest polygon counts imaginable and things like cloth physics for some reason. Again, stuff you'd likely see from tech demos, not proper games. Unreal Engine is capable of doing so much more than we often see from it, but because there is this obsession with graphics and realism, we just aren't getting more than the very surface level visual style. And because a large number of AAA developers only understand the engine at this basic level, many modern game devs fail to fully understand things like shaders, lighting, and post-processing. They struggle with optimizing these kinds of things, which is why so many Unreal Engine games often look and run like garbage, despite initially looking very pretty in the marketing. That's why I'm convinced for most development studios, moving to Unreal Engine won't solve anything. I'm convinced the main reason why so many studios are moving to Unreal Engine is not because it's so much better than their own proprietary engines, but because of these two things. 1. Publishers and development studios can outsource a lot of the work to contracted employees, oftentimes ones that are in other countries where they can get away with paying for cheap labor. We've heard many different stories over the last several years of the disastrous yet profitable strategy to outsource huge chunks of development, and moving to Unreal Engine will make that process much easier for these studios. And secondly, because of this obsession gamers have with photorealistic graphics right now, Unreal Engine 5 is one of the easiest marketing tools. The average normie consumer thinks that moving to the Unreal Engine will magically fix whatever problem their favorite franchise has. But of course, a game engine alone can't make a game good. It still takes tons of effort from talented individuals who know how to make a captivating art style, handcrafted and distinct animations, proper optimization skills, and general good game design knowledge. And it worries me that studios and consumers alike both think that somehow Unreal Engine is going to solve everything. Now, I'm not opposed to any of these studios making the switch to Unreal, I just want that to actually mean something. It could be a huge benefit if the developers still put in the effort needed to make their game go beyond the surface of the engine, and it will be likely easier to onboard new developers, outsource work, and transform the thousands of assets from the store to help with development. There's no problem with that if they aren't solely reliant on those things. I'm just not confident that the move to Unreal is being done because studios want to put in more effort to their games. I think it's the exact opposite. Now let's get back to the topic of graphics, because most of the time I can't think of anything less important to game development for me than pushing photorealism to its limits. There are exceptions to this, of course. Games like Battlefield 1 greatly benefited from the use of photorealistic graphics and helped with the immersion of the game. Everyone that's played that game knows how incredibly intense and real it feels while taking part in the battles in that game. But a game like Battlefield 1 was developed that way from the beginning based on comments from lead developers of DICE at the time. From the outset, the vision for Battlefield 1 was to make an incredibly immersive and realistic recreation of an alternate World War I setting. And the Frostbite engine excels in trying to achieve these goals. When backed by creative vision, realistic graphics can enhance a game's experience. But do all games need ultra realism to enhance them? Some of the most immersive games I've ever played utilize very cartoonish or Pixar-esque graphics and art styles. And sometimes it is these photorealistic games. But when every game starts to look photorealistic, won't everything just kind of feel the same? And we'll lose a lot of distinctness in our video games? Let me put it this way. Would Pixar benefit if instead of having that cartoony charm, switched to live action? Would that be beneficial? Or would it lose its appeal pretty quickly? A lot of older games stand out artistically because of different visual styles and often the feel of a game's engine. Think of From Software games. They have an extremely distinct and tight feeling to the combat and benefits greatly from an engine that prioritizes the art direction over graphical fidelity. Not one single Unreal Engine Souls-like feels half as good as From Software's combat systems. And I think a lot of that is owed to the feeling that Unreal Engine has a lot of jank inherently inside its coding that prevents a lot of these Souls-likes from feeling as smooth as even Dark Souls 1. It's the reason why so many From Software fans have trouble playing any other Souls-likes. None of them feel as good or smooth. And I'm not a developer, but I think most of you know what I'm talking about when it comes to the janky feel of most Unreal Engine games. FPS games made in Unreal often, not all, but often feel pretty janky as well. Think about the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare. COD 4's maps have a very distinctive look and most importantly feel of the game's engine. And even 17 years later, this FPS gameplay still holds up as more smooth than most modern FPS games made with Unreal. Going back to the Stalker games. With the switch to Unreal, they've lost their proprietary AI system that was so revolutionary. AI in this game doesn't just act like any typical FPS AI. They will flank you, suppress you, try to flush you out with grenades, block off every path that you could possibly take that would allow you to regain safety. Hell, they can even hear you reload your gun and push that advantage they have. Could GSC Game World recreate this AI inside the Unreal Engine? Sure, but can they or will they? Does Unreal make trying to recreate this sort of AI harder to accomplish? Who knows? Maybe it's possible, but without being the ones behind the tech of the engine itself, developers might lose out on specific tech that made their franchise stand out, and my fear is that many of these games will start to feel the exact same as developers stick to the basics of the engine. And lastly, has the improvement to graphics over the last 10 years been that dramatic? If you take a look at games released 10 years ago, many of them could easily be mistaken for a recently released game. The examples are nearly endless. Is it worth the extra development time to improve the polygon counts of every texture by a factor of 10 when games already looked this good 10 years ago? Who is this actually appealing to? But maybe I'll make a video dedicated to the idea that video game graphics have peaked many years ago and have plateaued to the point of being almost negligible. But that's all for this video, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like if you did, and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'll see you all in the next one.